Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Pepin, NHL Talk. I'm Thomas Pepin, and let's talk about the NHL. So, it's always really weird switching over to being on camera again because I just never do it. And it's like the contrast of just, laying down and playing video games versus getting in front of a camera. I mean, it's a way different thing. But anyways, so if you haven't seen these before, because, I haven't done them as often recently, it's always unscripted and on the fly. So I only know the subject and some of the topics are written down, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it. So, so let's just get into things. And I was running couple minutes late, so I didn't get to pull everything up, so just bear with me a sec. So as I'm doing this here, if you take a look at the description of the stream, it'll give you a list of all the topics and all the links. So I'm just pulling that up myself so I can start pulling things up, like the topics in there. So there's one new topic added to the list, and then the rest are all I'm just going to kind of discover as we go. So for example, trades and stuff, signings. I mean, I saw them as they happened, but I haven't paid as much close attention to all the stuff lately. So, first topic here. Now, the question, I'm not sure because I thought about maybe sharing my screen as I pull up the topics, but to be honest, I'm not actually going to be reading them. More just kind of just the title of it kind of tells you what you're going to talk about. I just want to see if they're... Well, I guess I should say first the first topic there is the management and coach changes for the Calgary Flames. So the reason why I did it in this order in particular, not necessarily which ones, like they're not necessarily in sequence, but they are in the sense of one can't happen until the other has happened. So, for example, Toronto couldn't have hired Brad Treliving if he wasn't let go from Calgary. So, typically it will be chronological, but not in all cases. So, anyways, just regarding the management and coach changes, they brought in Brad Treliving. I think it was mutually parted ways, I think is exactly mutually agreed to part ways is the exact phrasing. So he left the team and Sutter was fired. So he was fired. Now, and then Craig Conroy was hired as GM, and Ryan Huska was hired as coach by Conroy. So I guess what we'll do is have a look at performance and kind of maybe discuss the changes in that regard. I wonder if... it is actually searchable for GMs and stuff. Alright, so... Treliving was... Actually, you know what? We won't evaluate the ones going out. We'll always just evaluate the ones coming in. So then we're not like double dipping or going back and forth on topics. So, cat friendly... So the first on the list there of links is cat friendly, which has a a lot of great information. So in particular, GMs and stuff like that, which a lot of other places wouldn't. Wikipedia is also not bad for that. So in this case, I want Conroy. Does it? No, this has his player stuff. Is it going to have his management stuff? So maybe if we go to the Flames. Okay, so previously he was assistant general manager and then just got promoted. So that's his story. So when it comes to his performance historically, we don't have any sort of sample size. I mean, we've got what he's done to date, but I wouldn't, think about that too much. We'll probably discuss as we go through trades. Actually, not in this case because he didn't make any moves that I don't think. Well, actually, he made the Toffoli trade, and that's maybe significant enough. So we'll touch base on that later when we go through trades. So Conroy's kind of an unknown commodity. Ownership would have known their dealings with him prior, so I would say they know what they're getting. Other GMs would know what he's like, but the general public, it would be difficult for us to have any sort of expectations with how he's going to be GM in Calgary. Now, as a player, he has a decent track record. I don't think he would have won any cups. Because he played with Calgary, and I don't think he played with any teams that won. They lost to Tampa Bay, and that's it. So, yeah, that's the first Stanley Cup for Tampa Bay. And he was on the team that lost in Game 7. So, anyways, he's got, a good background, and he was good. I think he would have been considered a two-way forward. I forget if he was center. If I'm not mistaken, he was. But, so, a good kind of perspective, having been a player, having been an assistant GM. So this is something I'll probably talk about on a number of occasions through the stream, is I always lean towards doing something new versus the status quo. So in the case of Calgary, they give Conroy a promotion versus hiring somebody that's previously been a GM. I like giving somebody an opportunity, a new perspective, because if you go with somebody else, the only way I would ever hire somebody that's previously been a GM is if they've had extremely high performance, so teams that have been to conference finals relatively consistently in the time that they were in charge, or winning a Stanley Cup. Otherwise, I mean, and then maybe a President's Trophy, and if you lose in like the first couple rounds, and it's happened maybe a couple times, stuff like that, it's not as bad, because getting a regular season performance is an accomplishment at the very least. So, yeah, that kind of stuff, a couple round wins, conference final, President's Trophy, those are the kind of things I'd be looking for if you're going to hire somebody that's been a GM. Otherwise, I would lean towards getting somebody new, because if you haven't accomplished anything, I mean, you would have to have had a really difficult assignment for me to ever consider you, because you should have done something. So I know it's it's a very even league, and it's easier said than done to win things, but still, it's all performance. It's always performance for me. So in this regard, I really like the idea of giving Conroy a shot. We'll see what happens. He has a history in Calgary, is now in Calgary again, so he's kind of a guy that I think he's American, but yeah, he's been around for a while in the area. I really like the idea of going with a known person, but somebody that's kind of new to the role. Otherwise, Ryan Huska. Let's have a look. So it doesn't have him listed in that way. Let's see if we have him here. So previously, he's been an assistant coach with the Calgary Flames, and he also got promoted. So again, I'm perfectly on board with that. Try something new versus trying something that never succeeded before. I'm completely on board. Now, let's just see if he has a track record as a coach anywhere. So he was head coach of the Flames farm team and then got moved to assistant coach. Now it doesn't say his coaching record. Hockey DB might have this. Let's see if it does. It does. Okay, so he also was a head coach in the WHL. So he, in all his years as head coach in the WHL, he always made the playoffs. Lost in the first round twice. Lost in the second round 3 times. Lost in the third round once, and won one championship in his second season. So that's a pretty good track record in junior. Getting past the first round, that's an accomplishment just in any league. And then getting further and even winning a championship is quite good. When he took over head coach of the Adirondack Flames, and then it also went to Stockton Heat. So he missed the playoffs his first season, second season, lost in first round. In third season, missed the playoffs in fourth. Now, AHL is a difficult league. Depends on what assets you're given. So like draft picks and things like that from the Flames. I would say you don't have as much control. Maybe that makes it where a coach could and should have a greater impact on the team. But sometimes you just get stuck with a bad team. So it's tough to really be too critical. He was even or above 500 in all seasons. And to flip from junior to AHL and to have, decent stats, it's not bad. I wouldn't say good either. I would say it doesn't really tell you much about him. But the junior performance would kind of lean you towards thinking that he has at least some potential. So Calgary Flames isn't a bad team. They're having trouble keeping players at the moment. And so in that regard, it remains to be seen what kind of team he's going to have and so as a result, how he'll be able to perform. So again, totally on board with the decision. I think it's a good idea to try something versus go with something that hasn't worked before elsewhere. So I think some good decisions in Calgary. We'll see what the results are, but not bad decisions there. So next we'll move on to Toronto Maple Leafs, where Kyle Dubas goes out as GM and Brad Treliving comes in. Now, again with Dubas, I don't think it was technically a firing. So again, decided to part ways. Now, I don't know if this is a rumor, that he was asking for maybe more money than Toronto was willing to pay. So originally it sounded like, so in the exit interviews, he was upset and he was unsure if he was going to come back. It seemed like Shanahan, I didn't watch the full thing. I only watched things afterwards. But from my understanding, Shanahan seemed to indicate as though it was possible and maybe even likely that Dubas was going to come back as GM. And then things changed really quickly, by the sounds of it, where Dubas was hesitating on if it was the right fit for him. And if I had to take a guess based on all the things I heard, he probably asked for more than he really needed in order to stay. It was basically like, you better overpay me or I'm not staying because I just don't like the conditions, kind of thing. That's what it feels like. I don't know if that is the case, but based on what I read and what I remember, and I could be remembering wrong because this is back when it actually happened. I think that's like a month or a month and a half ago. When was it? May 19th. So yeah, about a month and a half ago. But I think that's what I remember, and I think that's probably close enough to accurate. But anyways, it doesn't matter so much. He's gone, and then Treliving comes in. Now, it's interesting because this is a complete opposite of what I was saying that I would lean towards, to bring somebody in that, as far as I know, hasn't won anything. All you're doing is making the cautious decision. I mean, maybe they could turn out doing better in a new place. But, so for example, Treliving was general manager in Calgary for 8 years, almost 9 years. And as far as I know, never produced anything of any significance. So that was 2014 in April. 2014 in April. So that's when they didn't make the playoffs. So now there's always a lag of impact, excuse me, for a GM, because you have to make moves for things to happen. Otherwise, you're just taking over whatever was left for you. So for example, players tend to develop in like 3 to 5 years, and you're kind of stuck with wherever things have been in terms of drafting and developing up to when you're starting. So really, it's 3 to 5 years until you see any impacts of things that you would have done. So now, short term, you can do some stuff. So there's that too. But yeah, so in his first full season, they lost in the second round. next season missed the playoffs, then lost in the first round, missed the playoffs. So this is where he should start to have an impact on the team. Missed the playoffs in 2017-18, lost in the first round. Then they won in the qualifying round, so this was during the COVID years, lost in the first round, missed the playoffs, lost in the second round, and then missed the playoffs this past season. So best performance is getting to the second round. As far as I'm concerned, that's very insufficient. And to take over the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that's been struggling for so many years, to get past the first round, let alone go further, and you're giving it to a guy that really didn't do much. Maybe pulled off some difficult trades to get Huberdeau and was it Uyghur for Tkachuk, because I think Tkachuk didn't want to re-sign for whatever reason. There's always details that we don't know. But what Toffoli wanted out, and I believe there's a couple other people that want out right now, like is it Backlund or something like that? Anyways, I know it's difficult for a lot of Canadian markets other than Toronto and Montreal because of weather and things like that. So like Winnipeg, for example, smaller market, cold weather. Edmonton, cold weather, decent, reputation, but it's the cold north. So, so I mean, there's something about that, but nonetheless, you got to deal with what you got, get young guys, trade for people with the right, kind of attitude, interest in the market. You can do it. It might be more difficult, but it can be done. You just got to do a lot more work and really work at it. So, because like, for example, I mean, I never played professionally, but if I was to play, I would love to play in Canadian markets. I would hate to play in these quiet U.S. markets. I want the pressure. I would want to try to play well in front of diehard sports fans. I wouldn't want to be with some like casual fans that are not all that interested in how we do. I like the pressure, and there's players like that, I'm sure. So you just got to get them, find them, and acquire them. And apparently insufficient in Calgary with Treliving. So anyways, so that's kind of my opinion on him. I think they went with a guy that's known and has some experience. I like their idea to go with an unknown guy in Dubas. I think that was very smart. I think he made his mistakes with Toronto over the seasons, and he's probably really learned from them. We'll talk more about that in a sec when we get to him. But, I mean, what are you going to get out of Treliving? I don't... You're probably going to get status quo, and Toronto's probably not going to do well. That's my prediction. But, of course, we'll see. I mean, maybe if they move one or more of their core four, empty up some cap space, better spend their money because they have too much allocated to three players. If they can kind of sort that through that stuff, then maybe that's good. But I have no confidence in Treliving. No offense to him, given his track record. So, unfortunately, Toronto fans, I think it's not going to go well. But for your sake, fingers crossed. For me, I'm indifferent. I actually, if anything, dislike Toronto, so I'm okay if they do bad. Again, sorry, Toronto fans. So anyways, now one thing I should say, so I say that, in my franchise mode that I do stream on YouTube, I took over the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I totally would in real life too if I was given the opportunity. Uh, I'm kind of, I don't really care about the market. I would want the hardest assignment. Give me a team where the fans hate what's happened and are on your back and you need to win now. Give me that. I like the pressure. I would love it. So I'm not against Toronto in any sort of great way. I just kind of laugh at them because the fans are just so brutal with the team, and just the ownership never tends to make good decisions with who to manage the team, and then the people make mistakes that are managing the team and so on. So anyways, yeah, so that's kind of my thought on that. And then I think they said that they're going to be keeping Keefe, and I'm totally on board with that. He's done well. Team has done well. I think it's more a question of the players than the coach, is what I would say. I don't really like... I don't dislike... It's not that I dislike the players. I dislike the players at their cap hit, and then the combination of players. In particular, I don't like Nylander. I find that he's offensive and only offensive. He doesn't take his defensive responsibilities seriously in what I've seen. I haven't seen everything, but in the little that I've seen. So, for example, I saw some in the playoffs this past season. I didn't like it. Nothing against Tavares. I think he's a decent player. Nothing against Marner, Matthews. Just at their cap hit, you got to be producing more, and they're not. So it's just not enough. If they were all at something like 8 to 9 million, I'd say that you'd be okay with that. And plus, in combination of over all those players, that adds you a second Nylander, and that could be the difference between getting eliminated in the second round and going on to the conference finals and stuff like that. So that money, if it's not spent well, you can really get yourselves in trouble. So that's bad management, Dubas. So they need to make some changes, and we'll see what Treliving does. I'm not confident about what he'll do. It'll probably be status quo, signing people at market value, as he did with, I think, Huberdeau. I think he signed him at a high amount, or I forget that. Actually, that's interesting to see. Yeah, 10.5. Nobody, unless you're like literally the top players, I would not be paying over 9 million. Tkachuk at 9.5 is even that's expensive. Huberdeau, I mean, yes, he performed well in the season prior, but you can't be spending so much. If you can't get a good cap hit, trade him. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I've never managed a team, but that's my perspective. So anyways, so it's probably going to be status quo in Toronto, and it's probably going to be as bad or worse if I had to take a guess. So we'll see. All right, so then for Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh fired Ron Hextall and hired Kyle Dubas. Now, Hextall was a GM, and Dubas is director of player personnel, or what was it? President of hockey operations. So I believe that's the position above a GM, and he's taking over the management responsibilities until he hires a GM. is my understanding. And so, again, we're not going to talk about Hextall out. They didn't miss the playoffs in a long number of years, and then as soon as they do, they fire the guy. I mean, I don't know about that, but nonetheless, I mean, at some point you have to make a decision, and they did. That's fine. Now, in terms of taking on Dubas, so what I think is going to happen, if I had to take a guess, is that Kyle Dubas probably, because it was his first time as a NHL GM, he probably made all the mistakes he's going to make. I mean, he might make mistakes in the future, obviously, but I have a feeling that because he's young enough and has experienced enough in a very difficult market, I have a feeling that he probably would have learned from it all, probably in a number of different ways, how to, manage negotiations, how to manage the cap, things like that. I don't know if I like the decision to hire him in a promotion. I probably would have started him as GM and then see how it goes after like 3 to 5 years. But, he's got experience, has a decent track record as a GM. So it's not, a crazy idea for that to happen. Now, let's just see. So he was assistant GM, interim GM, assistant GM, and then GM for 5 years. So May 11, what year was that? 2018. Uh, 2018 was it? In May. So he would have gotten them after the season. They lost in the first round. So after him, so again, the first 3 years, you can't blame the person for the results, but they do have some input. So they lost in the qualifying round. That's a COVID year. And then lost in the first round, and then lost in the second round. So they made the playoffs in all the seasons. 3, 4. So he really only had 4 seasons. He was 36 in 25 in the first season, 35 and 14, 54 and 21, 50 and 21. And then, ties too. So altogether, some of the highest performing teams during that time frame. So pretty good results. Just, I don't know if you can blame him necessarily for all of it. I know that he made a chunk of those signings of the core players. So you can blame him for a chunk of that, but I wouldn't say all of it. And given, kind of his reputation, like I said, I have a feeling he will have learned from this experience. But does he have enough experience for him to be promoted, to be hired up, essentially? I don't think so. I don't like it. So, again, I would have done GM for him 3 to 5 years and then go from there, but maybe he wasn't willing to do that. Who knows? So we'll see what happens. But I think he's probably going to be better in Pittsburgh. I have a feeling that Pittsburgh's going to do well from the combination of what he'll do and whoever he'll hire will do. So if I had to take a guess, Pittsburgh's going to do well moving forward. And in the short term as well, kind of living out the last few years of their core players' careers. So like Malkin and Crosby, Letang, all that kind of stuff. And Pittsburgh's got some room to be able to make some moves and stuff. So I'm confident that things are going to go well, but he could prove me wrong and turn out doing horribly. As I wouldn't say he did horribly, but I don't think he did well in Toronto. So, but we'll see. So that's kind of the story in Pittsburgh there. Next up, Washington made a coaching change. Laviolette out and Carbery in. Now, I'm not familiar with Carbery's track record, so we'll have a look at that. I believe he's primarily been an assistant coach, but I don't know what he's done outside of that. So he was a head coach in the ECHL. He lost in the second round, first round, lost in the finals. So he's gotten far enough. Lost in the third round, so conference finals. So, so quite good in his experience in the East Coast Hockey League. So that's promising. Then he went to the OHL for one season and missed the playoffs. And then wasn't there immediately after that. And then he went to assistant coach in AHL, then was head coach for 3 seasons. Lost in the second round, so you know that's something. And then there was a COVID year, so I don't think there was any playoffs for them. And then missed the playoffs in his last season. But his record was 24-7 in that season. So I don't know exactly what would have happened there. That's weird. Anyways, so altogether his track record's, decent. I wouldn't say it tells you either way. It's the same sort of story as Huska, I think was his name, the guy in Calgary. So it doesn't really tell you either way. And otherwise, he was an assistant in Toronto for a couple of their good seasons. So personally, it's the same story as, again, I think his name was Huska in Calgary. Yeah, Huska in Calgary. Try something new. Totally on board with that. Now, Washington's in a weird spot where they have some older guys that are going to be going, like ending their careers soon, like Ovechkin, Backstrom. And I think that's about it of their core old guys. Some of their other guys of their core are a little bit younger. But I think that team is kind of, in a transition. They're not quite a top, like a high-end competitive team, and not. They're like a bubble team for the playoffs, basically, is how I classify them. So to try out a new coach is not bad. The problem is that if you're trying to win, it might not be the right call. But I have a feeling that because they had Laviolette and then they missed the playoffs, I think it's that they're essentially preparing for some sort of transition, whether that be a rebuild or a retool. And then they're willing to bring in somebody maybe with not as high of expectations. That's what I would guess. But, of course, I don't know those details, and who knows. So anyways, again, I'd rather try somebody new than go with status quo. So I like that decision for Washington, and we'll see what happens. Who knows? And then with Laviolette out there, and Gallant out in New York, which that guy keeps getting fired everywhere. It's weird. I wonder what's wrong with him and is it players, GMs, who knows. So Laviolette goes into New York. New York's kind of got a decent core, I would say. They got to figure out what they're doing with. So, for example, like they picked up Kane, but are they gonna they're probably not gonna keep him. Who is the other guy? St. Louis winger, Russian. What's his name? Gapping on his name. I'll have to pull it up. There he is, Tarasenko. Jeez, too many names to remember. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, and then that kind of, depends on what kind of squad he has. But he's the kind of guy that, he's won before, versus. So like I know Treliving is a GM and Laviolette's a coach, but Laviolette's won things, whereas Treliving hasn't. So if you're gonna bring in somebody that's been in the league a lot, only bring in people, in my opinion, that have won something, not people that have won nothing. So let's pull up Laviolette's coaching stats. Okay, so coached a lot of seasons. Maybe Wikipedia, does it have his coaching record? It does. Okay, so it does total everything. So his total NHL coaching record is 752 wins, 503 losses, 25 ties, then 150 OT losses. So a very good record as a coach. His playoff record is 78 and 76, and to have a 500 record in the playoffs is pretty darn good, because there's only the teams that get to the final, I think, that turn out having a winning record or along those lines. So to be at 500 or above 500 means that you've gone pretty darn far. So he won a Stanley Cup in 05-06 with Carolina. Now, since then, hasn't won anything. I don't know about President's Trophy wins, but the majority of the seasons he's made the playoffs. So they missed the playoffs the season before they won the Stanley Cup. With Philly, got to the Stanley Cup final, lost to Chicago that season. Conference semifinals, first round, second round. Got to the finals again. So, I mean, right there, if you've been to the finals twice, won the Stanley Cup a third, 3 seasons where you've been to the final, that's a really, really good track record. Now, maybe you could say that he's becoming dated. So maybe his coaching style is not going to be as in line with changes to how the game is played, maybe. But as of late, it was in 16-17 that he got to the final, so that's not that long ago. The game hasn't changed too dramatically since then. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a great decision for New York to try him out. What'll happen, who knows? Yeah. So altogether, I like the decision for New York because they're kind of in a win now sort of window. I wouldn't say that it's like a very narrow window. I think they've still got time to win, and he's got a good history behind him. So I think it's a really good decision to go with him. So I like that hiring there. All right, and then moving over to Philly, they fired Chuck Fletcher, and then Briere came in. So I think it's the same story with Briere. I don't think he's done any GM work before. I think it's just assistant GM, if I'm not mistaken. So special assistant. So I would say probably close enough. So same sort of thing, unknown, but he's played in the league. He understands what it's like to be a player. He was a good player, played on some decent teams. So to try out a guy like that, totally on board. They would, again, Philadelphia would know better than anybody else, and other GMs that would have dealt with him would know if he's a competent GM. But I have a feeling that, Philly is confident. Well, obviously they're confident enough to promote him. So we'll see what happens. But always, I'm totally on board with trying something new versus, hiring a GM that hasn't won anything. So not much more to say than that. I think it's a great promotion in this case, not really a hiring. And he's always been, I think his whole career was with Philly, or Oh no, maybe did he play in Buffalo? I can't recall. Anyways, it's not all that important. He spent a lot of time in Philly, and so it's the same sort of thing like Conroy. Uh, Bring in a guy that's been around and see what happens. So we'll see what happens, I guess. And then Nashville. So David Poile is, I guess, retiring. I think is what it was labeled as. And John Hynes was fired after Barry Trotz was brought in as GM, and then Barry Trotz hired Brunette as his coach now that he's GM. So the decision to bring in Barry Trotz. So again, familiarity with Nashville because he was a coach there, and then they would know if he would be competent enough to become a GM. He wanted to become a GM, so the familiarity with the two parties and the knowledge of his capabilities, it makes tons of sense why they would try him out as GM. And so again, he's the same sort of story. Trying something new is always better to me than going with a known guy that hasn't done anything. So I think it's a great call. Now, as a coach, I believe he has an extremely good record. I think he's one of the best ever, even. Actually, talking about that. Where is... So most wins in a career, he sits third. And on the subject of Laviolette, he's eighth all-time in wins. And then, it won't let me put them in order by win percentage. But anyways, so Laviolette has a .526 winning percentage, and then Trotz is .504. So Trotz, I guess, he did better in his good seasons than not as good in his bad seasons. Maybe is the best way to put his history. So anyways, but he's one of the most the winningest coaches in history. So given that he has that track record, to put him as a GM, of course we'll see what happens, but he's got kind of the pedigree to be well suited. So now we will pull up his history as coach. Barry Trotz coaching record. So in this case, I should give in the description when I'm done, I'll put in Hockey DB because they've got really good information here. So the majority of his losing actually was his beginning of his career. So first 5 seasons they missed the playoffs, all losing records. So, and I should say, because this is, I mean, again, we know that he's a great coach, but nonetheless, so he won a championship in his second season as an AHL coach, made the playoffs in all the seasons, and got to the final once, and this is in 5 seasons. So really great pedigree going into the NHL. They gave him a pretty long leash in Nashville. He coached how many years? Started in 98 and finished in 2013, so whatever the math is on that. Is that 15 years or something? Anyways, so most of his losings at the beginning of his career, and then lost in the first round 4 seasons in a row after missing the playoffs 5 seasons, then missed the playoffs, then round 1, round 2, missed, and then he went to Washington, round 2, championship, then went to Islanders, 2, conference final, and then missed the playoffs. So killer track record, especially in recent history. So it's one of those, like, so if you hire a person, like any regular job, like let's say at a grocery store, you'll have a guy manage he'll be a grocery clerk, and then maybe he'll be a department manager, and then maybe grocery manager because that's the biggest department, and then assistant general manager, and then general manager. So really, he's done his time as a coach to be worthy of a chance as a GM. Now, would you maybe want to have given him some sort of experience as an assistant GM before GM? Probably, but they probably know that he's competent enough to move into that, or to be, if he's not, to be supportive enough of him for him to be able to be successful. So altogether, I think a brilliant decision there in Nashville, trying something new, but something with great pedigree coming in. I think it's a brilliant decision. I think it's probably going to turn out being very good for Nashville. They've been one of the highest performing franchises for a large number of years. I think they're going to continue to be a strong franchise. Then in terms of coaching, I really like that decision to bring in Brunette. So I think he won Coach of the Year, if I'm not mistaken. Where is it here? Okay, so Jack Adams, I thought... No, so he was one of the finalists. He didn't actually win it. I think he was one of the finalists, but... in any case, so let's see his coaching record. Okay, so his experience is as an assistant coach. So in Minnesota 2015-16, then had a gap until 2019-20, was assistant in Florida for 3 seasons, then took over as, I guess, interim head coach in the end. Maybe was full head coach, but in the end, the one season he coached, the team went 51-18, which is unreal. I think that, yeah, they won President's Trophy that season. Lost in the second round, and then he was an associate coach in New Jersey, and they lost in the second round. So, I mean, primarily an assistant, but his one season as a head coach was fantastic. And so, I mean, geez, who else, who would be better than him to give an opportunity of all the people who don't have much or no, who don't have any or much experience as a coach, of all the people that are like that to have an opportunity to coach in the NHL, he's like at the top of the list. So I think it's a brilliant decision. He's played in Nashville before as a player. I mean, it wasn't his main home. He played kind of all over the place. But, yeah, perfect decision. I think it's brilliant, the combination of the two. If I had to take a guess, I think Nashville's going to do well. I like how most of these franchises are moving away from going with status quo. I think it's great. And so kudos to all of them for making what I think are good decisions. And John Hynes didn't do well enough in Nashville, so I'm totally on board with getting rid of him too. So now the rest of these, I mean, there's not much to say. So Eakin's going out and Cronin coming in. I mean, Eakins didn't do great, but the team was never really meant to do well. What's his history as a coach? So he has an extremely long coaching history. I didn't know this. That's wild. So extremely experienced in all as a coach. So he started coaching in 1987 and has been coaching since. Like, that's wild. Never much of a head coach. So he was a head coach in Maine in college. Assistant coach for the Islanders for 4 seasons. Head coach in AHL 2 seasons. Lost in the first round. Missed the playoffs. Head coach again, this time with Northeastern in college. Below 500 record, or at 500 if you combine all the seasons, ballpark. So not that great. Primarily an assistant coach for Maple Leafs, Islanders, and then was head coach in the AHL for Colorado. Lost in the first round. Then that was a COVID year. Lost in second round, first round. So, I mean, to be the coach of Anaheim, I think he's, a fine decision. To think that he's going to be a solid NHL coach, I would be concerned, because in all those seasons to have that kind of track record, I don't think he's going to be that great of a coach. But of course, we'll see. I could be proven wrong. Who knows? So not much to say there. Columbus, I believe, fired Brad Larson. And then the rumor is that Babcock, as of tomorrow, is going to sign. So the news story from TSN says an $8 million deal for 2 years, so 4 per season. Now, let's pull up his coaching record. Now, the one thing is he's got apparently. So the rumors are that he's full of himself and treats players not so well. And I'm not necessarily against that. Maybe that's a controversial thing to say. I don't know. What you need to do when you're in charge of anything, but in this case, a hockey team, you need to get the highest performance out of players kind of at whatever cost. The limits of that cost is not to be obviously abusive or anything like that. To be a hard coach, to even be arrogant is not really, who cares? It's all about results, and the only kind of catch to that is just that you're not being abusive or influencing or being impactful with the team where, like, for example, players don't want to play there and they want to get traded. That's where you're a problem. So in that regard, I don't know exactly what he's like. Only the players would know. Rumors are that he's maybe not pleasant, but it's not your job necessarily to be pleasant. As long as he wasn't abusive, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with him as a coach. So when it comes to his history, I mean, he's got a heck of a track record. So pretty much made the playoffs in every season he's been a coach. Started in 02-03 with Anaheim, lost in the finals his first season. Before that he was an AHL head coach, coach in junior. All of his coaching pretty much was really good. Maybe had a couple off seasons here and there in junior. But since he's been in the NHL, so lost in the final, missed the playoffs, first round, third round, so conference final, then won the championship, then went to the final again, second round, first round, second round, first, missed the playoffs, first. So, I mean, you can't really get much better of a coaching track record than Babcock. So he's the exact same story as Laviolette. If you're ever going to hire a known name, like a veteran coach, go with somebody that's won before, that's proven themselves in the NHL, and he has. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a great decision for Columbus. Now, is he going to be able to be impactful enough with the team? Because the team's not that great. We'll see. But of all people that could actually make the team do well, he would be right up there. So I think it's a great call. What's actually going to happen, who knows? And you would hope that if there was any substantial negative feature to his personality and coaching methods, you would hope that he will have learned from getting let go in Toronto, and so we'll see what happens after as he's a new head coach. So assuming that everything goes through as reports are saying. So I like the decision. Columbus is, they're really struggling as a franchise, so they need to do something. To be honest, I think they should fire their GM, but that's another story. So anyways, we'll see what happens in Columbus, but I think it's a very good call to bring in Babcock. Next story is away from all the management and coaching changes. We're going to talk briefly here about Arizona and their problems with their arena. So they're currently playing out of, is it Arizona State's? Yeah, Arizona State's arena. And that is just so brutal. The fact that an NHL team doesn't have an NHL rink for, well, it's at least one season so far, and how it was just like a complete wreck. I think it was only one season. But yeah, it's been a complete wreck for however long it was in that arena, because it's not suited for NHL teams in any way. Apparently, their practice facilities aren't well suited because they need to get new ones too, or something like that. Anyways, just a complete wreck in Arizona, and they've been there for so long. The fact that things haven't, they've been a crappy team. So, well, let's just pull up their seasons. All right. So when they came over as the Winnipeg team, they weren't so bad. So conference quarterfinals, quarterfinals, missed the playoffs, quarterfinals, missed the playoffs 4 seasons, quarterfinals, quarters, conference final, missed the playoffs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons. Lost in the first round, missed the playoffs 3 seasons in a row. Like, brutal track record. I think their attendance has been horrendous. Let's pull it up. So at the start, not so bad, then dipped, got back up when they made the playoffs some more, dipped, and it's been below average pretty much since. Last season was 4,600, season before 11,600. Otherwise they've been like 11,000 up to 14,000, so 10,000 less, and it's probably because the capacity must have been 4,600, but just so brutal. As far as I'm concerned, that franchise needs to move. They've struggled with ownership, I believe, is one part, and then also like rinks. I think they've changed twice or something like that already, and then this would be their third rink, so, or third NHL rink eventually, assuming they would have one. Like, it just doesn't seem like this market's going to work. Now, in terms of demographics and things like that, and like local industry and all that sort of stuff, it's one of the better options compared to non-existent markets. So markets that don't currently have a team in the US, it would be up there. So it's not that it's a bad market, it's just that it hasn't worked. And as far as I'm concerned, I would just give up on it, given how much trouble they've had. So, like, it's one of those, I have a feeling this is kind of right up there, same sort of situation as Atlanta. Atlanta, I believe, substantially greater population, if I'm not mistaken. But I think it seems like one of those markets that's just not working, just like Atlanta wasn't working. So I would say relocate. And I did a whole series on, in this case, what was the perspective I was taking? We were talking, so it was about expansion teams, but the concepts are the exact same thing for relocation versus expansion. So give me a second. I'm just going to pull up the name of it. the playlist that I have for that. So it's called NHL Expansion. It's an 18-part series I did, evaluating a whole bunch of different markets, and then kind of rank ordering the markets in terms of viability for a franchise. So anyways, if you're interested in that, that'll actually tell you all my opinions on this. I won't go through that in this video just because, I mean, I would be going over the exact same stuff I've already said. So if you're interested, you can just go back and have a look at that series. You can take a look at each market that interests you. And likewise, I think in the summary, it summarizes the whole thing. So I think there's just one summary one at the end. But anyway, so you can check out any number of those if that interests you. That'll give you my opinion on relocation as well as expansion markets. So like I said, given that I've already talked about all this stuff before, I'll refer you to that if you're interested in my opinion on those. But long story short, I just think Arizona, it's not going to work for the team. They might still keep going for it and in the end force it to happen. But of course, we'll see. I don't know what's actually going to happen with Arizona. That it's kind of in the hands of Bettman and their ownership and, well, the market, if they'll actually support a building to be built and all that. So, because they voted not to support, I don't know if they were voting for funding or all the details of it, but they voted against it, whatever the details of it were. So anyways, so that's that. Next thing, I believe now it's official that the salary cap is increased to $1 million. So essentially that's the way it's been categorized from other people, and I would agree, is basically it's a flat cap. That's a negligible increase. You could call it a raise of $1 million to one player, or maybe a depth player, because $1 million it's about the same as like a fourth line player. So kind of a small increase, and all these teams, like Toronto's it's the perfect example of where you allocate too much money to too few players and you're just at a cap crunch. Had the cap increased over all the years, and maybe they'd be in better shape and it would have been more reasonable to give those contracts. But I mean, you couldn't have known that COVID would happen. But the problem is you need to, in my opinion, undershoot forecasts, leave lots of room. So kind of my strategy, you would have seen this actually in the franchise mode I play for NHL 23. So kind of a good way to describe my approach to cap spending is, now again, this is not real life, and who knows what would actually be possible, realistic in real life, but what I would try to do is pretty much year to year plan for a gap of about $5 million. Now, of course, it's going to be more than that in the end from expiring contracts and depth players, which I kind of would recycle every year depending on performance. If they played well, re-sign them. If they don't, just find some other free agent. Or make a tiny trade like a 7th round or a 5th round pick for some depth player, whatever. But anyways, typically you would have in the strategy that I have. So actually on that note, it doesn't hurt for me to get the exact title of it, but there's another playlist I did. So it's called Building the Perfect NHL Roster, and essentially the best way to describe it is I developed a management strategy for NHL GMs. And in that typically the expiring contracts, if I recall correctly, but at the very least it's close enough, you'd have one or two people worth about 5 million in cap hit that would expire each season. So to have that expire, that gives you that wiggle room. So if it's a flat cap, you just find somebody at a lesser cap hit. If it's if it the space grows, then you know that you actually in theory could go and sign a free agent. It could even be 10 million. So the 5 million plus, let's say the cap increase is 5 million, you got tons of space to do something like that. So, or let's say it's 3 million, you can get an $8 million player in free agency. So always leave something like 5 million in cap space plus whatever extra money you have allocated to depth players, fourth liners, third line defense, that kind of stuff. Because then that'll allow you to round out your roster. That could be, once you know that information, you do your re-signing. So, for example, right now, teams can be re-signing their players, and they know what the cap will be, so they can actually execute. So that one player that you're maybe not so sure about if you want to re-sign, you can kind of delay until about now when you would know what the actual cap space will be, and then you can negotiate, or if it's an RFA, trade their rights and get somebody that's at the cap hit you want, or some reasonable cap hit. Then you could get somebody in free agency. But long story short, basically you need to have that wiggle room. In the case of a flat cap, some sort of anomaly like COVID years, again, I wouldn't have known, but I would have had this strategy to have space anyways. So year after year, that's the kind of stuff. So if you have a guy that you really want to re-sign him, trade away that 5 million if you need to do something like that. Like, let's say you're going to have that wiggle room of 5 million plus the depth players. So in the end, you're probably going to have something like 8 million or so in cap space. Let's say you have a $5 million player, you want to re-sign him, you sign him for $7 million. $7 million or something like that. Trade away that $5 million player that you're not so sure about. You got that $5 million in cap space again. Or you wait until you figure out what the cap is going to be. If it's flat, then you know to trade them. If it increases, you might be able to keep them. Let's say even if it decreases, then you know for sure you need to trade them. So it gives you all that flexibility if you kind of plan out to always try to have that $5 million plus depth player wiggle room to play with. So anyway, so all these teams that really plan for all this like substantial growth to the league, who knows what could happen? Maybe people start. So a great example, a recent thing was that they're not going to be doing Pride jerseys anymore because of all the issues they've had. Now, I'm not going to share my opinion if I'm for those jerseys or against those jerseys, but let's just say that because of not doing this, let's say there's a substantial amount of viewers that are for those Pride jersey nights. Let's say they stop attending games, stop watching the league, then the revenue decreases as a result of this action. Maybe next season the cap's going to be flat. You don't know with all these things. So it could be anything that could affect the league. Let's say the change to the Fanatics, I believe, is effective next season, then doing the jerseys. Maybe that really messes up and people buying jerseys get really upset. Then league revenue is not good enough. Anything could happen. There's lots of different things. It's not just COVID. So you should have foreseen these things to have the flexibility in your cap spending. So that's why you need to budget underspending and then deal with things from there. It's better to underspend and then fill that up versus overspend and be completely screwed with your cap flexibility. Now, some teams. When did I speak about this? So this was in my Stanley Cup recap thing that I did at the end of the season. I spoke about how teams have been maybe, or at least have stumbled upon the strategy of using LTIR to allow them to have essentially more cap space and have a better team come the playoffs. I described my whole thoughts and maybe twists on that strategy in that video. So go back and have a look at that if you're interested in my opinion on those. But so there's all these unique things that you really need to come up with alternatives to. So what I'm getting at is spending right up to the cap. So not going underspending like I was kind of saying, and giving yourself that flexibility in this sort of time frame, end of season up to free agency. I would like to kind of have that $5 million flexibility to then wait, figure out what that the cap is going to be, and then make my decision from there. If you want to go right up to the cap and then really push the limits with the LTIR stuff, it's a strategy. It's not a bad strategy. I would just be really cautious, because then you might have where you need to completely unload at the trade deadline if you've had no injuries and haven't been able to use LTIR to your advantage. So it just really makes it kind of difficult in that regard. But both have their own positives and negatives. So that's just kind of my opinion on the cap increase. I don't think it should have made a difference to anybody, but that's because I would have been careful with my spending, whereas I think a lot of GMs probably just aren't careful enough or don't strategize well enough. I don't think it's necessarily being careful. I think it's having a good flexible strategy is the way I would look at it. So anyways, that's my thoughts on that. And then to finish off the stream, we're just going to go through some of the signings since essentially the start of the playoffs, as well as the trades all the way up till now. So give me a moment to pull those up. So we got trades, signings. I'm going to filter by minimum. We'll say 4 million, but I'm really only going to talk about $5 million cap hits. Oh my god. I just saw the extension for Adin Hill. Oh no. Oh, that is such a bad signing. My god. Anyways, we'll talk about that in a sec. So where do we start from here? So there hasn't been that much in terms of signings, so we won't talk about that one because it's under 5 million. Caulfield for 7.85 for 8 years. 7.85 per year for 8 years. He's 22 right now. What has his season's been like? 23 goals and 43 points in 67. 26 goals, 36 points in 46. So if you're ever going to do it with anybody, first round pick, he would be it. And 20 goals are tough to come by. If you're ever going to do an 8-year, and he did well in those one playoffs where he only played 10 games, so in his first season. So, I mean, he's got enough of a track record where it's not bad, but I don't like anything more than 5-year contracts. again, for flexibility's sake. 3 years is kind of more my preference for most players. So anyways, when you're thinking about that, I don't know if it's enough of a track record to do, like, what's his cap hit again? 7.8. It's not much of a gamble, I would say. If it was getting into the $9 million range, then I would say it's a bad idea. Could he have gotten that? Probably. Or at least possibly. But to get that for 8 years, if you're going to gamble on 8 years, it's a reasonable cap hit. That's not going to be too difficult to get rid of, buy out towards the end, assuming he at least, plays reasonably. But 8 years is a long time, and I've demonstrated previously that most players aren't consistent within a certain level of performance. Like for more than 3 seasons in any like long time frame. So I would say I don't like it, but it's not a bad contract. If you're ever going to do it with anybody in any amount, it's the right idea. So I think it's perfectly fine. Next, there's Gavrikov for 5.875, 2 seasons. So if you're going to spend good money, 2 seasons is reasonable. Kind of, low average performance as a defenseman. 18 points, 69 games, 12 in 55. 33 in 80 is great. 19 in 72 goes back to the norm. So again, I don't know enough about his style of defense, how good he is, his analytics and all that. But my understanding is he's like a two-way defenseman. Performance isn't maybe enough for me to be on board with 5.875, but it's not bad. It's kind of, market value. So not really much to say about that contract. I think it's reasonable, just too high for what I would do. Next up, Severson, 8 years at 6.25. I know he's a decent defenseman, but that's a long time. So his track record, 39 points in 82 games, 31 in 69, 21 in 56, 46 in 80, 33 in 81. So very consistent, pretty above average production. Again, I think he's a two-way defenseman. Right defense, which is very hard to come by. Right-hand shot, same story. Columbus got him. I would say they probably spent on the low end of market value. So I would say it's a great contract from a market value perspective. Just I really don't like 8 seasons. It brings him to 36 years old, so that's reasonable. But yeah, 5 years is kind of what I would be wanting to do. So, but again, it's a reasonable contract, just not what I would do. What's next? Jesper Bratt, 7.875, 8 years again. So that's in New Jersey. 32 points in 60 games, 30 and 46, 73 and 76, 26 goals, very good. 32 goals, 73 points, 82 games. So very good. So he's got the track record where if you're ever going to do 8 years, he's got 2 very, very good years. At a cap hit of 7.875, I think it's great value, probably in the long run. But because, again, people really fluctuate in their performance, I don't like 8 years. 5 years would be better. But if you're going to do it with anybody, he's the kind of guy to do it with. Now, mind you, he was a 6th round pick, so pedigree's not the best. But, again, his NHL track record kind of tells you that it's probably right on target. So he's worth what he's getting paid. And like I said, it's probably below market value for his performance. But if you're going to sign 8 years, then that's kind of what you would want. So not my kind of contract, but not a bad contract. Dubois, this just happened. 8.5 per for 8 years. He's 25. Oh, and sorry, Brat's 24, so that puts him at 32. Dubois at 33. Dubois, 21 points in 46, 60 in 81, 63 in 73. 28 goals and 60 points in the 81, and 27 goals, 63 in the 73. So consistently above 20 goals, 25 goals probably on average, and just a bit below a point per game. 8.5, no chance, and especially not for 8 years. So very happy for Winnipeg not keeping him. I would never have signed him for that, so kudos to them for not spending that money. What they got back in the end, we'll talk about the trade later, but I don't know if it's enough. But sometimes when you're stuck, it's better to get something than nothing. I think they got something, so we'll talk about that. But 8.5, as far as I'm concerned, is an overpay. It's market value probably, but it's like dead market value and no cost savings for the long-term contract. So I think it's a bad contract. We'll see what happens, but I don't like it at all. So, I mean, he's a centerman. Like I said, it's market value. Just I would never, ever sign that contract. I don't like it. Timo Meier extended with New Jersey. $8.8 million for 8 years. Puts him at 34 years old. He's 26 now. So 31 points in 54 games. 76 with 35 goals, very good in 77. 31 goals, 52 points in 57. And then 14 points in... Oh, sorry, that's one season there. So my bad. So that's 40 goals, 66 points in 78 games. So very high in goals. Pretty much on average, it looks like he's sitting around 20 plus goals, but oftentimes above 30. 30 goals is hard to find. 8.8 per is for that number of goals and points, I would say is probably towards the low end, kind of between low and market value. So I would say it's a good contract. If you're ever going to do it with anybody again, he was a first-round pick, so he's got the pedigree to justify a long-term contract as well. So performance plus pedigree plus age makes this, and then slightly below probably market value. I'd say it's a good contract. If I would ever do 8 years, it would have these kind of characteristics. We'd probably want slightly less cap hit, but ballpark this is what I would say would be good. So yeah, decent contract, good job. Totally on board with that one. Just again, I don't like 8 years. Barbashev, $5 million per 5 seasons. See, this is the high end of kind of term that I would want to do with Vegas. Track record, 12 points in 38 games, 26 goals, 60 points in 81 games, and then 16 goals, 45 points in 82 games. Split between St. Louis and Vegas, which is why it was slow. I had to do the math there. 18 points in 22 games in these playoffs, though, so very good. So I think that was a fit thing, and they traded away Smith. So I like the idea of trading the guy that they prefer less away and keeping the guy they like with fit. So, but anyways, well, I guess we'll talk about that. So 5 years, that's fine. Brings them to 32 years old. So that's, a good age to kind of lock up. $5 million per for maybe 15 to 25 goals, like 3/4 of a point per game. I'd say it's pretty much, I'd say again, this is probably below market value, towards the lower end of market value maybe. But to sign for 5 years, it seems probably about right. So I'm totally on board with the signing. Great contract, good decision on the player. I like it. So I like the contract. And again, 5 years I don't like, but this is the kind where I would do 5 years. Now the Adin Hill contract that I didn't know of till now. 4.9. They already have Leonard. I don't know what they're doing with Leonard, given his, life circumstances and stuff. But Adin Hill, he's got decent stats, but no track record. Yes, he wins the Stanley Cup, but his career save percentage is like 9-1 something. It looks like he had one good playoff, and you give him 4.9. I think it's a bonehead contract. It's only 2 years, so you can maybe get out of it relatively easy because it's short. But I think the fact that they won a Stanley Cup with a guy making, I think it was like 1.5 was his previous contract. 2.175, same thing. Very low cap hit. It's proven my hypothesis that you don't need a star goalie anymore. I didn't think it would happen yet, but the fact that it happened this season marked a change in the league. I don't think goalies should get paid as much as they used to. This is too much for his track record. No way. He's proven why he should not be getting paid that much. Because if you can win with a $2 million goalie, $1 million goalie, why would you ever on earth pay $5 million? It's like I said before, it's in that strategy series that I did, Building the Perfect Roster, I think was the title again. What I would do, my recommendation, my strategy would be 3 goalies, all at ballpark $1 million to $2 million, just rotate through, all based on performance, because there's like maybe 6 goalies in the league that are elite that maybe are worth a good salary, like $5 million plus. But beyond those people, they should all be at like $1 million, $2 million, because the performance difference between them is essentially negligible. So yeah, 3 goalies, $2 million-ish on average between them. Sorry, did I say 2 goalies? Or I meant 3 goalies if I didn't say that. 3 goalies, $2 million apiece. Rotate through them based on performance. And you should have outstanding goaltending. I've done it in franchise mode in NHL 23. I know it's a video game, doesn't mean much. But the concepts kind of should make sense in real life as well. So anyways, so really dislike that contract. If they're going to do it, short term is what you would want to do. So whatever, if they're going to gamble on it, they did it right. But really dislike it. And like I said, I think they've proven that shouldn't be getting paid that, and no goalie should be getting paid that really, unless you're one of the best in the league, which he's not. So, and then that's about it. I mean, Perry was signed at $4 million, but it's below my threshold to talk about. So, So we'll leave that. That's it for signings. And then we'll finish off with trades. And again, the kind of the threshold to talk about is somebody involved that's a $5 million player. So, what do we have here? So there's Provorov went to Columbus. Really decent player. Cap hit is 4.725. Original cap hit was 6.75, and I think in both cases he's actually relatively worth it. So recent history, 36 points in 69, 26 in 56, 31 in 79, 27 in 82. So performance, just looking at that, maybe the $6 million is a slight overpay. But 4.725 for what he produces, I would say that's a steal. I think it's great. He's got enough of a track record. It's only now that they have him 2 seasons, so lots of flexibility in that. So a brilliant pickup. Now, in terms of what they gave up, in the end, they lost a first and a second. And that's it. Now, he comes with a bit of controversy in the sense that, the whole pride jersey thing, but I don't really talk about the politics and all that kind of controversy stuff. I just talk about performance, and based on performance, he's totally worth that cap hit. For a first and a second, for 2 seasons of that player, fantastic trade in my opinion. I think that's really good. Outside of that, the rest was kind of odds and ends between the other teams, so not really anything else to say there. Columbus also picked up Severson and then signed him. Only cost them a 3rd-round pick to get that solid of a defenseman plus Provorov. Like, their defense is going to be really sorted out, so they might be a lot more competitive this season than they were in past seasons, because defense was a big problem for them. So really good for them. Great job in my opinion. Ryan Johansson was traded with half of his cap hit retained by Nashville. Now the thing about that is, I think, oh wait, no, it wasn't Johansson, it was that's another thing I should pull up actually, is buyouts. Because yeah, it was Duchesne that was bought out. So anyways, I'll come back to that too. So for Nashville to get rid of him, they still have the $4 million cap hit for 2 seasons. I don't really like that. I would have lived out the rest of his contract, in my opinion, and they only got back Galchenyuk. So I don't like that trade, and I think that's still technically under Poile, but I don't know if Trotz was. He must have been involved in it. But I don't like that trade at all. I would have, like I said, just ride out the rest of the contract and then do your rebuild of Nashville after that, because he still produces at a reasonable rate. So last season, 28 points in 55 games. I mean, obviously not good, but the previous season, 26 goals, 63 points in 79. 2 seasons before that were not so good. Season before that was decent. Like, he fluctuates, but like I said, only a couple of years left. Live out the rest of the contract and, go from there. So don't like that trade, whoever made it there in Nashville. Taylor Hall to Chicago for Ian Mitchell and Alec Regula. Mitchell, second round pick, 24, bubble NHL player, so not really much there. Regula, defenseman, third round pick, bubble NHL player too. So I think it's just unloading cap space. Then they gave signing rates for Foligno, and I think he was re-signed if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, for 1 year, $4 million. So I don't like the trade from Boston's perspective. I think it's bad. I don't know what their plans are with cap space, so that's another story. But the haul was good enough, so it's good for Chicago. 2 seasons left. So 3 seasons ago, 33 points in 53 games. 20 goals, 61 points in 81, and then 36 points in 61. So, I don't know. I don't like the trade from Boston's perspective. I like it from Chicago's perspective. This is new. Kevin Hayes going to St. Louis. I didn't see this one. Half of his cap hit retained for 6th round pick. Yuck. He's got 3 seasons left. I mean, so they're clearing cap space, but you're going to have dead cap half his contract. I'd rather have the player. For 3 seasons, just ride out the contract. Like, just be patient. 31 points in 55, 31 48, 54 and 81. Not that bad. I mean, getting overpaid, but why would you have that dead cap space? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. So anyways, I don't like that trade from Philly's perspective. Great for St. Louis. They only had to give up a 6th round pick. $3.5 million cap hit in St. Louis. Great trade for them. Really good job in my opinion. Alex Newhook. I don't think I'm really going to talk about that. It's for signing rights. He's an RFA if I'm not mistaken. So, but who knows what he's going to get. Signed for, we'll see. So the trade with Dubois going to, sign and trade technically, with him going over to LA. It's for Vilardi, Iafallo, Kupari, and a second. I didn't even know about the second being involved there. So that's pretty decent. Vilardi to start. 23 points in 54, 7 in 25. About a point per game in the AHL. And the last season, 23 goals, 41 points in 63. 23 years old, first round pick, so great pedigree. He could turn out, I mean, those stats right there are similar in trend to Dubois. So they might have gotten Dubois plus extra players in terms of value. Now, he needs to be re-signed. So we'll see what he actually is for a cap hit, but assuming it's reasonable, which Winnipeg has been great for their signings typically, I'd say great. Good job. So that alone, I think they win the trade. So not overspending on Dubois and getting back someone who might perform the same as Dubois. It's a great trade for Winnipeg. Just 1-for-1. Plus they get Iafallo. He has 2 seasons left, $4 million cap hit, cheap. I'd say Winnipeg, I mean, you can see I'm actually a Winnipeg fan. Their problem, in my opinion, has been not enough depth. I mean, really, it's not so much depth, but I think it's just they relied too much on players that I don't think live up to their expectations, really. Connor's probably the one exception where he's consistently great. Everybody else, I don't know, they just don't feel right. Scheifele I don't trust enough. He doesn't play well enough defensively, in my opinion. Wheeler, I didn't like him as a player, and he got bought out. I just saw, and we'll talk about that. So I just like that they're changing players. Totally on board with that. So anyways, 30 points in 55, 37 in 79, 36 in 59. So, and consistently ballpark 15 goals a season. So that's a great depth player. 2 years left at $4 million. It's probably an underspend in terms of cap hit based on that performance. And 29 years old, probably right in the prime. Could maybe even be better than this with the right players. That makes this a steal of a trade, in my opinion. And we haven't even gotten to, they still have the second round pick, which is a bonus. And then there's Kupari, was a first round pick, 23 years old. RFA, I believe. I didn't check, but yeah, RFA status. 13 points in 57, 15 and 66 in the past 2 seasons are his only real time. Just under a point per game in the AHL. Basically, he's a bubble NHL player. I would say probably like can slot into like a third line position, maybe fourth line if he's underperforming. But 23 years old, I mean, perfect. The combination of all those players plus the draft pick, I'd say hands down Winnipeg wins that trade. I know you want to say that the argument is always whoever gets the best player wins the trade, but in this case, Vilardi might turn out being as good as Dubois, so at a dramatically lesser cap hit. So steal for Winnipeg, plus they got bonus extra depth. I think it's fantastic for Winnipeg. I would say it's better than they were with Dubois. So fantastic trade in my opinion. I really like what Cheveldayoff does. I'm surprised that the team hasn't performed better. Maybe hasn't done enough with depth, but it's Winnipeg and it's a tough market to really get people to play in. So anyways. Toffoli's kind of below my threshold for players to talk about. Riley Smith to Pittsburgh. Great pickup for Pittsburgh for only a third round pick. Riley Smith has 2 seasons left. 27 goals, 54 points in 71. 25 points in 53. 38 and 56. 26 goals, 56 points in 78. So basically 15 to 25 goal scorer, about a third of a point, or sorry, yeah, 3/4 of a point per game, ballpark, or 2/3, whatever, somewhere around there. Great player, in my opinion, for $5 million per. He's 32, probably still going to be as good, maybe even better in those next 2 seasons with a team filled with a bunch of elite players. Steal, in my opinion, third round pick. Now, Vegas had to sign Hill, which was a bonehead signing in my opinion, and Barbashev. The Barbashev one's fine. Actually, I would say it's a good signing. Hill was bad, so they needed to clear up cap space, and which is why they made this trade. Great for Pittsburgh. I would say really dumb for Vegas, given what they signed with afterwards. So, and then Bailey to Chicago with a second round pick, basically for buyout purposes, is what my understanding. We'll go have a look. So, to give him away. 1 season left at $5 million with his performance. Did you really need to do it? What did they give up again? Second round pick, basically. Giving away a second round pick to get rid of the cap space. I'm okay with that. Because they didn't retain, so they can just replace that cap space with whoever they want. So it's good for the Islanders given their current circumstance. A second round pick is not typically of any great value for what you'll sign and how likely they'll turn into an NHLer. So I think that's a great trade to clear up the space rather than retaining any salary if you really wanted to get rid of that space. And I mean, the team is kind of in a win now situation, and they should have been better than they were. So I'm totally okay with that trade. I think it's actually smart. So that's fine with me. This is during the draft, so basically picks for picks to move up and down in the draft, and that's basically it for trades of any significance. So like I said, my threshold's basically $5 million-ish. So that is that. Last thing is these buyouts. So where are we at here? When was the buyouts? So it started with Ekman Larson, 4 years left. Buyout on a contract, 8.25. So what's the cap hit on Vancouver then? Whoops, that's not going to tell me. Where is Vancouver? There it is. So just a dead cap hit. So this season's not that much. 2.3, 4.7, 4.7, 2.1, 2.1. To have dead cap of that amount is just horrendous. So this is why you don't sign people long term, because then you're going to get stuck with this stuff and then you do stupid things with buyouts. So I just think it's a really bonehead signing, bonehead trade, I think, to get him, bonehead buyout, just you name it, all bonehead. So don't like it. Duchesne, was it a straight buyout? Because they already bought out. Oh God! See, this is so stupid. So if this was Trotz, I think he's done a bad job so far. 2.5, 5.5, 6.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. You can't have dead cap space. Plus, they've got Turris for 5 more seasons of $2 million. Like, they are just in rough shape for dead cap now with that. Live out the rest of his contract. It makes no sense. Duchesne had 3 seasons left. Why would you want that cap hit for that many seasons when you just live out his contract? I mean, it's not good value, but last season, 43 goals, 43 assists, 86 points in 78 games. And he had an off season, 22 goals, 56 and 71. Like, I know he's been very up and down as of late, but you've only got a few years left. Just ride it out. So I really dislike that start. If that's Trotz making those decisions, which he must be involved in it, brutal. Really dislike it. So on that note, actually, I think Nashville's in trouble in terms of what they'll be able to do with their franchise. Stupid decisions, in my opinion. And then Winnipeg bought out Wheeler. He had 1 year left. Now, it all depends on its impact for the next few seasons. 2.75 each season for the next 2 seasons. I'm okay with a buyout if it's that low for that short of a time frame. He's never done buyouts before, as far as I know, especially not big ones. So I'm okay with that. and they're doing him a favor to let him go to a competitive team, I think is what the story is, because they probably just couldn't trade him at his cap hit. So he'll sign for whatever at wherever he'll sign for. So I'm totally okay with that. If he was, I mean, he's done enough for the franchise as it is, I guess. But like, can't you just play one more season? Couldn't they have just kept him one more season rather than, because he's still like a point per game, ball like just under. 46 and 50, 60 and 65, 55 and 72. Like just play out one more season and then go somewhere else. Like you're not so old that you can't still play. You're 36, you can play 2, 4 more seasons maybe. So I just don't like, probably Wheeler influenced them to do it. And they went ahead to do him a favor, but they shouldn't have, and he shouldn't have done that. Just play one more season. Like, come on. So, whatever. I don't know. It could have been for cap considerations, given the trades they just made and the extensions they need to make and so on. Whatever. Whatever the reason is, maybe there could be a good enough reason. It's in the range where there's, like I said, it's not that long of a hit and not that much of a hit, so it's okay if it's just to be nice, but still, I mean, I hope there's more reasons to it than just to be nice. So anyways, because they got lots of cap space to sign the people as far as I can tell. So anyways, and that brings us up to today's date through the playoffs with all the major moves and stuff. So altogether, I'd say that the league is kind of trending towards making better decisions when it comes to management and coaches, giving people opportunities versus going with known people that are probably going to underperform. So that's good. Arizona probably needs to relocate, in my opinion. And just pretty status quo for a lot of these teams with the signings. Some of them have done pretty decent in not overspending. But you got to be careful. Those 8-year contracts we saw with a couple of the buyouts and stuff, you get stuck with people that just stop performing. So that's why I would really avoid 8 years. 5 years max for me, and then preferably 3 years is kind of, but anyways, these people, they do what they do. I'm not in a management position, so I don't know if people would sign what I'm asking for. But I'd rather overpay for short and then be able to get rid of the person than to underpay for long and then get stuck with an asset that you just can't move, and then it messes up your entire ability to compete. So anyways, so that's it. We'll leave it there. Went smoother than I expected, actually, having not been doing these types of streams for a while. So I'd say decent job. Stream went longer than I would have wanted, but 2 hours is not bad. That's kind of what I plan for. So anyway, so we'll leave it there. So if you like the stream, hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications. Channel homepage has upcoming streams, and on that note, next one is July 6th, 9 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to do a recap of the free agency up until that date. So it starts July 1, and then we'll have basically 5 and a bit days, 6 days, whatever it is, worth of free agent signings that I'm going to talk about. So it shouldn't be a crazy long stream, but however long based on all the signings. And I might go lower than my threshold of $5 million. I might talk about contracts that are smaller. We'll see what happens. Depends on what signings happen. So anyways, that's the next scheduled one. that you can actually see scheduled. Otherwise, franchise mode, you can check the About section, NHL 23 franchise mode that I play. That runs Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Today is Friday. I'm actually going to skip tomorrow, so I'm going to cancel doing that stream this week. Then I am going to do Sunday. I won't be doing Monday, and then I'll recontinue on Tuesday, Wednesday for the rest of the sequence of days. So just so you know, I'll probably add a note to the About section of the channel if you forget. But yeah, those are just some slight changes because I've got some other stuff I need to do, so I won't be able to stream those days. I also stream Be a Pro, NHL 23 again. Those are completely unscheduled, so it's whenever I have time or want to take a break from doing work or whatever. So that you'll just have to, again, this is why you'd want notifications and being subscribed and all that stuff. And yeah, any comments, leave them in the comments, suggestions likewise, and we'll leave it there. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys again on Sunday with franchise mode. So until then, see you guys.